Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey, Denis. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Now, listeners may pick up the accent already, but whereabouts are you in the world today?
I'm not too far from you. I'm in Sydney, Australia. That's
very
the
good.
accent.
Yeah. And your surname, Italian?
It is. It's Italian, yes. And
Okay.
the U ending is a little bit, throws people off, but it's typically from Sardinia. I don't know if you know the island of Sardinia, gorgeous part of
Yeah.
Italy. That is where surnames come from with a U ending.
Interesting, because my dad's from an island below Corfu, so between Italy and Greece,
Okay.
a little island called Castos, and it's untouched, 7 kilometers long, but we have quite a lot of the Italians coming over to sort of spend some time over there, which is pretty good. So it's very close. We're close here, Australia, New Zealand,
I know.
but also close from our backgrounds and our heritage as well.
I love it.
Hey, so I've given the listeners a little bit of a background into who you are, but would like to know a little bit more about you. So you're the co-founder and COO of Webinar Ninja, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, which is a SaaS company, and you founded that in 2014.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and then the $100 MBA. Tell us a little bit more about both those sort of organizations or things that you've been doing.
Sure. So the $100 MBA was launched in December of 2013. It was an online course to teach people the fundamentals of business for $100. So not $100,000 like what a typical MBA education would cost. We made it accessible for $100 to teach the fundamentals of business, to get started, to most likely to start an online business or to transition out of a career and and launch that side hustle or that business idea that somebody had.
You know, what you just said there, I think that a lot of our listeners may be today thinking about, hey, I'm actually quite tired of the corporate world or any other, doesn't matter what size of business they're in today. If they're thinking about transitioning out to go and do something else, is it easy to do a transition into something else? And what would be one or two things you might want to suggest them to think about as they start thinking for themselves around that transition?
Great question. So I transitioned out of a teaching career, and my co-founder, who I started the $100 MBA with, and Webinar Ninja, is my husband, who is also a teacher, Omar Zenhome. And we both transitioned out of decade-long careers to go full-time into entrepreneurship. So I'm very familiar with what that transition period feels like. And for me personally, I had no business experience. And the first thing that I did to get out of teaching was to give myself a taste of something else that could be a possibility. I've been a big fan of doing short courses. And so I did a 2-day film course while I was living in Dubai at the time. That's where I ended my teaching career officially, because teaching has taken me all over the world. And I did a 2-day film course just to see if it was something that I could explore further. And just that little taster gave me of an idea to then go on to a 4-week filmmaking course. And that was kind of how I found myself in entrepreneurship. So bit of a strange way to get there. But I guess the first thing, there's 2 things actually I would say, and I'll sum it up really quickly, is I had to decide that I really wanted to leave teaching and that decision phase can take years, and it did take me years. But when I finally decided, I took action and I just did a taster to give me a sense of like, what could that next thing look like?
Yeah, that's great that you share that taster piece as well in the whole journey, because I think a lot of people feel like they will need to rip the Band-Aid off and go and do the whole thing. And I go like, hang on a sec, don't go cold turkey. If you're not sure about things, try and do that side hustle or whatever you want to go and do. Start doing it while you've actually got some income coming in. And then you can look at to transition very nicely into whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I understand right now that you're having a blast co-hosting a brand new kind of podcast with you and, is it Kate?
Kate Erickson, yes, the other half of Entrepreneurs on Fire.
Kate Erickson? No way. Oh, that's awesome. So Kate's been on my show as a guest. And so when I was sort of thinking about it, so JLD, John Lee Dumas, and I had sessions with him, and then he put me on to another guy called Travis Chappell. I
Oh,
don't know.
Trevor's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah. Great
yes.
people.
Yeah. So, and Kate, awesome lady. That's really good.
I'm so lucky to have her as a co-host. Yeah, I've been on the production side of the $100. So the $100 MBA, even though it started out as a course, is now much more well known for the podcast, the $100 MBA Show podcast, which won Best of iTunes, now Apple Podcasts, and it was 2,000 episodes later, top business podcast. I was always on the production side of things, so behind the scenes. So the podcast that I started with Kate, funny enough, during COVID, which I think a lot of podcasts came out during that time, was really something that was a passion project and just a way for her and I to spend each week together, because now we're living on different sides of the world. We used to be neighbors in San Diego. So this was a way for us to do a project together, collaborate. And yeah, so a podcast was born out of that collaboration.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, really, really good. Hey, we're going to go and talk about leadership and that side of things. And we're going to talk it through the lens of from a leader's perspective and so forth. And everyone's had different sort of levels of experience around leadership, and it sort of varies on the guests that I've had before, which has been brilliant because we've had people from different backgrounds, which is nice. For yourself, how did you get into leadership?
I'd say out of necessity, because in teaching, I never had a leadership role. I was a member of staff and in my department. And so when I transitioned out and I did some freelance videography before the idea of the $100 MBA came about and we started that business, again, I was just managing myself. That was my experience as a freelancer. And when we started our businesses together, the $100 MBA and Webinar Ninja, originally it was just me and Omar, and we were wearing all the hats. And so at that stage, again, like I was just trying to pick up the skills that I needed to give as much value and to support the vision and to support the business goals. And it was only when we started hiring teammates that then you start to become aware of the fact that you have to manage people. And by managing people, you have to start to lead. And so originally I was more leaning towards the customer service side of the business. And so that's kind of where I found myself now, managing the first person and the second person. And then once one of our teammates became the team lead and the manager of the customer support team, I was then managing her. And so I kind of sum it up, 3 words: out of necessity, just through building our businesses.
And when you did that and you were starting to build a team around you, what was 1 or 2 big lessons for you?
Oh, I'd say I had to find that delicate balance of not micromanaging, but also verifying and ensuring that tasks and the work got done. I think it's a big challenge for a lot of people. And I should also mention what's kind of important to note is that our team has been fully remote, completely distributed team since day one. So before the world went for work from home and all of that. And again, that was out of necessity. We didn't see the future or anything like that. But I'd love to say that was the case. It was purely organically that we grew our team that way. And so with that challenge came verifying that tasks got done and people and things happened without being so on top of people that they would get frustrated. And so I definitely learned the frustrations perhaps of team members. But at the same time, I had to also not apologize for setting expectations and being clear about what I wanted and the level of work and the quality of work that I wanted, and having people meet those expectations, but also seeing things from their perspective if timelines couldn't be met or things needed revision and adjustment.
So for your listeners, I'm going to entertain them a bit. I'm outside Washington, D.C. I'm just about 6 miles north of the White House in a town called Chevy Chase, Maryland.
Wow, that's awesome. And so you're pretty close to the White House. That's even better too. That's pretty cool.
It's very fun. And people, I don't know in New Zealand if Chevy Chase, the actor, has gotten there, but I promise.
I know what you mean. And so I think we actually even had a restaurant here as well called Chevy Chase, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah. The town came first. I always like to clarify.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Okay, cool. Good to know. And so that's where you're in this part of the world. Now, I've given the listeners a little bit of an introduction to you. What we'd like to know, Jim, is a little bit more about you, about your background. What would you like to share?
Dennis, I think for anyone listening to me, especially for the first time, I always like to describe myself as a 5 and dime behavioralist. And what I mean by that is I've learned about human behavior by interacting with people. I'm not an academic. I don't sit in the ivory towers of large institutions. I'm from humble beginnings. I have worked with people through politics, through consumer marketing, to finding myself working in governance and compliance, trying to change human behavior, not just about voting or buying more product, but doing it ethically. And then for the last 7 years, I've been focused on sustainability, where I'm trying to drive human behavior for good. And I always emphasize I do that both in permanence and impact. And I do that in my life's work. So whatever I'm doing, whether I'm working with my partner, Emily, raising our 2 boys, or I'm trying to convince someone to drive an electric vehicle, no matter what I'm doing, I'm trying to get people to think about how they're going to change that behavior to help society and themselves live a better, fuller life.
And do you, Jim, what you're just sharing is quite fascinating, because I think a lot of times that people struggle with change or not sure about change and things like that. How do you, as part of that, helping them with their behaviors and so forth, how do you help them go through that journey of change?
Dennis, change is the only thing I know. And I think if we're ever honest with ourselves, it's all any of us know. And it's just increasing. I started my career as a sales rep, and I learned the ABCs of sales. Do you know what that is? Have you heard that before?
I've heard it, but can you just explain it for our listeners?
Always be closing, right? And I think about when you talk about change, for me, what is the importance of change in life or even in leadership? And it's always be changing.
Yeah.
And the idea that we can never be complacent, even when I reflect back on my life, right? I was good for that moment in time, but I had to change for the next one. And I think that is what I try to encourage people. Let's not fear it. Let's embrace it. Let's be ready for it. And when it comes, we need to trust ourselves that we can adapt and evolve to where we need.
I love that. I really do, because I think the change is constant. We know that it is, and it's always happening. And the thing here for us is that we need to be always changing. And Jim, I think that, as you're saying, we go through change and embracing it is really important. But I think also that while we're going through that change, we're probably preparing ourselves for the next change as well. But we probably don't actually understand that properly at first. Yep.
Spot on. The other context I always try to talk about is we're human.
Yep.
And as humans, we try to control the natural systems, right? We create what I call the built systems that I shorthand, Dennis, as BS. We create religion, we create work, we create societies that inherently don't benefit everyone equally. And so I'm thinking about where we are today as a society. We have to cut the BS by stepping into it and changing it so that it is helping everybody and it's not just a few. So I do believe we don't know what we're doing because we don't know where we're headed, but the certainty of that versus the clarity of we're moving forward is the important aspect of what we need to be embracing as we're heading to the change. And what I love, you said this, Dennis, sometimes we're changing without even knowing it, and it's preparing us for.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really cool, because there's probably somebody listening to this episode right now, whether it's right when we go live and release it or maybe further on down the track, and they're probably facing some change right now. And even if I think about large organizations in the IT sector going through some massive layoffs and things like that, people are being faced with change. Now, the thing here is when we're in the midst of it, it's quite scary for some people because it's that unknown, the ambiguity, where we're going. What can people do, in your thoughts and opinions and your experience, to help them ease that tension or ease that nervousness or and anxiety and so forth, to help them through change? Any ideas?
Yes. And Dennis, I'll get very personal with you. In December of 2019, I decided to leave a job that I loved and everyone said I was perfect for, because I had come through and overhauled basic programs of environmental, social, and governance for the pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca. And I didn't just make minor changes. I took programs that either were non-existent or legacy and transformed each of the ES and G into global industry leading. And I did it within 3 years. So it truly was neck-breaking speed. Everyone said, how did you do it? And I did it by inspiring other people to accept their powers of change. And then when I got to that point, I realized I had done all I could. We had the 10-year strategy. So what was I going to do? I accepted a buyout, and it was going to happen in May of 2020. We were going to wait to announce it. But in January of 2020, we started hearing about a small little virus in China that eventually shut the entire world down. So my beautiful plan of transitioning and leaving, I wanted to stay with because I knew I had to trust my gut. But I went through a very sad period of personal crises and identity because I went from top of the world transformation change agent to the world shutting down and me being locked in my home as an extrovert. And I had to personally start to change and start to identify. So when change was happening to me that I had asked for, it felt as though it was all out of control. And so what I would tell anybody is when I had to keep reinforcing myself, and fortunately I had people who created the security net for me to mope around, cry, be upset, do all those things, but also grow up, Jim. This is what you wanted. Now create. And that's where I was born to build and create, not sustain and maintain. That's not who I am. So anyone going through change right now, what I always come back to is realize change is happening around you, but the amazing part of who you are and what you are hasn't changed. It's giving you whatever it takes to be prepared for what is next. So be ready, but don't hold yourself back. I think 95% of the issue with change is in our head, but we like to project it to the world around us out of our control. Instead of saying, I'm ready, I got this isn't my first time to manage change. We've been doing it from the first time we entered the world. So don't forget to trust yourself. That's my advice.
Wow, that is awesome. And I think, Jim, what you're sharing there about, I think you said, help me with the words, inspired other people, that they had the power of accepting change, I think is the words that you said. I love that, but also trusting yourself. When we were told to put your big boy's pants on and grow up and then do what you need to do, what was the thing that sort of triggered you or helped you go from that being upset, all that change and probably struggling with it, then to actually project yourself forward and move forward? What was the sort of thing that could have helped you trigger you to move forward or leap forward?
My network, knowing who I could talk to, who could show me the unconditional love to tell me to grow up. It's that fine line, right, Dennis? I didn't need someone telling me, oh, Jim, you're perfect. All is going to be fine. And I also didn't need anyone telling me to not sit with the uneasiness, to not sit with the sadness I was experiencing. And so people that have your interest at heart and also know when to kick you a bit, to get you up, not kick you when you're down, but kick you to get up. Is an important network piece that it won't happen overnight, but we all have those people. It's important we don't forget who they are, especially in those moments.
Rhonda Vetere, a massive welcome to you.
Thank you, Dennis. So proud of you. 500 episodes. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been amazing. And the journey's been really, really cool, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Now, for our guests' sake, they would love to know, whereabouts in the world are you today?
Today, New York City in America.
Today, New York City.
Today, yes.
Yeah, in America. So do you travel quite a lot?
Yes, Dennis. Travel quite a lot. There was about a 5-year period where I spent over 200 days on an airplane back to back.
Yeah. And it's when I don't know if it's the same airlines that you normally travel, but I remember here in New Zealand, I was traveling 1 year, 40 weeks in the year. And the Air New Zealand staff said, you're traveling more than us. Or they used to say to me as I greet you on the plane, you back again? And I'm like, whoops, okay. But it's amazing how you get to travel. And you know what? With the lockdowns and so forth, I really miss not traveling. It's been nice to be home, but I've actually really missed it as well. And look, it's been great now to get back into things too, which is good.
Yes, and you're from New Zealand. That lockdown for the listeners also. You're in New Zealand today, correct?
Yeah. Oh, him. Yeah. Now, Rhonda, tell us a little bit more about your background, because I've seen you're a global executive, STEM ambassador, speaker, triathlete, 2-time author, mentor. Tell us a little bit more about your background, where you've come from, what you've done, because listeners would love to hear that.
Sure. I've worked since 12 years old, Dennis, 23 mergers and acquisitions, intentionally moved industries. So retail, insurance, banking, all in technology, but covered all the industry verticals. And I think that's important because I didn't become siloed in one industry in the world, which is very important from a mindset perspective.
From a mindset perspective, because I think there's also probably listeners here saying, hey, I've been in this organization for many years or a few years. When's the right time to move? And Why is it important to move industries, as you said?
Change management, change is good. A lot of people don't embrace change, Dennis. It's good thinking, getting your blinders off, learning new things. And if you don't like what's happening within your company, do something about it. Go somewhere else,
Right.
learn more. Don't just sit there and think it's okay if something's not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of people sit there and they moan and groan about something, but if you don't like it, do something about it. And yeah, I think it's really good. Now, Rhonda, tell us more. What else? Organizations you work for? Who are the types of organizations?
Estee Lauder, worked Barclays, did the Bank One, JP Morgan, Chase, a merger. So a lot in finance and tech. AIG Insurance, HP, Dennis, where we worked together. I miss those days.
I do too. And I remember meeting you and your global team that I worked with, right? There was a group of some great leaders and went to various countries to do some workshops and team building and things like that. And I think the first time we met together was in Belgium, I think it was.
Yes, that's
And
memory.
yeah, and I remember, we remember, because I've told this story a few times in different episodes, Rhonda, whereby we took them on a tour around the city and then we turned the corner and we put them into a cooking class / competition. And then there was this big argument that happened because somebody took the chef's hat off and somebody else put the chef hat on. And there was this big blow up. And then I remember you wanting to jump in and I held you back a bit to say, just let it happen. And then we did the debrief afterwards. And some of those guys I've caught up with, they said that they still remember that day and that whole scenario, but what they learned from it. And I don't know, do you remember that day?
I remember that day in Belgium. I won't say the gentlemen's names but we did that every trip we went on. We made time for cultural immersion and learning. Again, going back to your other question, why do you move? You put yourself in different positions, and the cooking class was unique to do as a team. And you're right. The chef hat, someone taking it off, and the conflict management, let alone by cooking, the team trying to cook together, having a competition, right? Competition, results, action oriented. It's everything in the workplace too. But it was about team building from all different cultures, all different countries. And you're right. I wanted to jump in and stop the argument. I didn't want an HR issue either, Dennis, but I'm glad you said, Rhonda, stay back, let it happen naturally. And it's great to hear also, Dennis, that those gentlemen remember that, because that was a teaching moment in life.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was. Yeah. Now, when we also met, you had written a book called Enterprise Service Management for Dummies.
Yes.
Yeah. That was your first book, right?
It was. And that was the yellow and black book that still exists for dummies on how to manage the organization enterprise end to end before ServiceNow was a company, Dennis.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. And now it's known as ServiceNow, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's huge, isn't it? And also you've written some other books. What are those books?
Grit and Grind, which is taking all the experiences in the workplace and growing up on how to lead an extraordinary life. So the intent of that book was it was in technology focus. It was about life. All of the business and finance acumen learnings from teaching moments that we just talked about in Belgium. I should have put that in the book now that I think about it, Dennis. But there's other ones around the country that I talk about from in Korea to in India, but getting people's mindsets to think differently and talking about hard work, Dennis, and not instant gratification, because that's a hot topic in today's society. That's why I'm an ambassador of this field, science, technology, engineering, and math. And my action is through sports. I'm all about action, but I'm not about this instant gratification. And I think that's a lost art. So I wrote that book about working hard. And the cover of that, Dennis, is real cow manure and fertilizer. So I'm trying to illustrate you have to dig deep, go into details, go into your spirit, your soul, think, change, and get your hands dirty.
You know what? I've always looked at you as beautiful, elegant, classy, great person, and real down to earth. And then when I saw the photo on the cover of that book, I was like, Rhonda, what? But then I also know you in the sense that you don't have a problem in rolling up your sleeves and getting in there and making things happen. And so that whole metaphor, analogy, the photograph, I thought, yeah, it's really good. But come on. It really just moved me, shifted me a little bit to say, wow. But it also got my attention because then it got me to start thinking about what does it mean, and that grit and grind. I think it's a great book.
Thank you, Dennis. That means a lot from you. Yeah, I did not want that book with a cover of my face. That's not my style. But I was trying to make that metaphor, get dirty. What is this? What's going on? And if people could only smell that cover, Dennis.
Yep. Yeah. Imagine smelling it. Yeah, excellent. So you've been recognized for your leadership and influence, and notably one of the top 50 most powerful women in technology by the National Diversity Council over several years. And you've also been involved or been recognized by various magazines, and you've been in the media a lot as well. Well, what are kind of things that, and roles of CIOs, CTOs, and things like that? What are you seeing in the world in a sense of a female in executive roles, but in business today? And in other words, what are you talking about on the media when you're meeting with them?
Anywhere from artificial intelligence to how does it work, number one? And anywhere from why don't we have more women in this field? I get that question a lot. And I'm trying to shift the paradigm that this STEM field with technology is fun. It's not a bunch of brainiac. It is nerd. It's not just nerds. We're fun. That's why I came out with this fashion line and donated all proceeds to charities to get the next generation involved in us. And I'm so passionate about that. And I talk about also why you need a mentor out of your own industry to help you and challenge you and not be pigeonholed. So I talk about that also to anyone that will listen. And because that's a very important aspect of life. And also change management, which you mentioned. Why did you move? What did you learn? I always tell folks, get out of your country, adapt, cultural immersions. And so I can cross-functional industries, Dennis, because I've worked in all the industries. And then sports, I talk about sports a lot and what the parallel is with the STEM environment, about cadence and innovation and creativity. So all various aspects.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.